Hello and welcome to Anatomy and Physiology Lesson 4.02, Overview of Layers and Accessory Structures of the Integument. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk briefly about the three layers that make up your cutaneous membrane and the structures that are embedded in that help you take care of the things that your skin needs to take care of that we spoke about in 4.01. So let's go ahead and get started. This is a color-coded diagram. Yours is black and white, so you may want to take some time and color structures. Yours is also a little bit more enlarged than mine, but this worked best for the presentation. So you can clearly see that we have three layers. The top layer has a very different consistency than the middle layer, and then the bottom is much different. Usually we've spent quite a bit of time doing our chapters on tissues and talking about these structures, but this year with COVID, we're skipping around a little bit and we have not talked about the types of tissues that make up the three layers. So you'll have to memorize some terms, and then when we get into the chapter on tissues, those will make a little bit more sense. But our three layers are here. So we have layer one, and on this side, they've pulled it up so that you can see the difference between, or you can see the top of the second surface and the bottom of the first. So the top layer, we call the epidermis. We have two terms for skin. We have dermo and we have cutaneo. I believe one is Greek and one is Latin, but those translate for us to skin. So you have had the prefix epi on one of your med terms list, so you should understand that epidermis means lies above the dermis. The second layer, which is the thickest, is our dermis, so layer number 2. And then layer number 3 is called the hypodermis. And that has a much different tissue composition, as you can see. In fact, all these little yellow circles are what we call adipocytes. And I don't know if we've had adipo yet, but you know what adipose is. It's fat. So the hypodermis is a layer of fat. This is sometimes also called the subcutaneous fat, otherwise known as. These mean the same thing. Sub is below, hypo is below, dermo is skin, and cutaneo is skin. So these are two ways of saying the same thing. But this is made of adipose, which is basically fat. You talked about in chapter 1 on the functions, or I'm sorry, in lesson 4.01, the functions. One of the functions of your integument is thermoregulation, to keep your temperature steady, and your subcutaneous fat helps with that. It helps provide insulation. All right, I'm going to note out, I want to leave this space clear because we have several structures here we're going to be highlighting. So let's do the epidermis notes up here in the corner. When we talk about the skin in it, we're talking about what is on the outside, the type of tissue. So we're going to go with each one of these, we're going to do the type of tissue. This is a very long term. The first word is keratinized. Keratinized is basically, keratin is a type of protein, and what that means is that this is made of almost all protein. Oddly enough, your skin, your nails, and the outside of your skin are all just keratin, and the cells aren't alive. That's what makes it not hurt if you get scratched or you cut your hair. But that protein that's made of is keratin. It's tough, and it really protects. Next word we have is stratified. Stratified means layers. Layers. The next word is squamous. Keratinized, stratified, squamous, and then we have the term epithelium. So keratinized is the protein. Stratified means layers. Squamous means flat and thin. And epithelium means covering, in a sense. I'm kind of loosely translating that. So the tissue type, keratinized, stratified, squamous, epithelium. I think I might have spelled squamous wrong. It's Q-U-A-M. I'm going to have to look that up. That might be a teacher mistake. Basically means that we have this a lot of layers, and it's a tough covering, and it's what helps provide. I mean, it's the reason why we can go swimming. You know, it helps protect us from the outside environment. It's just a good tough coating to have. Now the bottom layer, the very bottom layer, is alive. But if you look at, let's say, all told, there are around 30 to 50 layers of cells in the epidermis, to give you an idea. So let's do the dermis. We'll do the dermis in green. All right, so our tissue type for the dermis is dense, irregular, connective tissue. Irregular means that the cells go lots of different directions, and we'll talk about why. Oh, I see I lost a word here. So sorry, I must have bumped my camera. Flat or thin. And this is tissue. Dense, irregular, connective tissue. We'll talk about the details of this more later, but for now you're just going to need to know that it's dense, it's irregular, it's connective. And it makes sense because we're connecting the epidermis and this fat layer. This one has much fewer layers. So the dermis only has 2 layers. So layer 1 is up here in this area, and then layer 2 is the rest. This second layer has all of the accessory structures, and we're going to spend quite a bit of time talking about the detail of the epidermis, the detail of the dermis. So these will be individual days where we'll split out and talk about these. Also, notice, take a second and look at the epidermis and look at the dermis. In addition to all of these accessory structures, do you notice something else about the dermis? It has lots of blood vessels. Look at the epidermis. Does the epidermis have blood vessels? The answer is no. So what happens is the dermis has to supply all of the blood for the epidermis. And that's not too big of a problem because it's only the bottom of the epidermis that's alive. Most of the cells in the top of the epidermis are dead. But let's add that to our epidermis, no blood vessels. All right, then we get into the hypodermis, subcutaneous fat, and this is for basically insulation, and it provides us with cushioning, with a cushion. I don't know if I'm doing this from memory, but if memory serves me, I believe that Inuits, which you guys are the common word for that would be Eskimos, have an extra thick, they tend to run an extra thick layer of subcutaneous fat. And that's an adaptation they have for all their years living in cold environments. All right, well, those are our layers. What we need to do now is we need to talk about all of these accessory structures. I'm going to start off with 2 One is in the top of the dermis and one is in, I'm going to actually, let me grab purple. And one is in the bottom of the dermis. I'm going to outline these guys in purple. So we have one that's shaped like this. Can't see it on this diagram, but it has circles in it, concentric circles like that. We have one that's shaped like this. These are nerve fibers. And we talked about in lesson 4.01 that, oops, well, I can see I lost one of my nerve fibers. Let me redraw that guy. We talked about the fact that your integument serves as a sense organ. Right, so the top one got a little shape like that. This is the top. This is the bottom. And these are specialized sensory nerve fibers that allow us to sense touch. This one is called a Pacinian corpuscle. And this is a Meissner's corpuscle. Pacinian allows us to sense deep pressure. And that makes sense because it's deeper in the integument. A Meissner's corpuscle lets us feel light touch. So if someone has ever taken a feather and gently kind of waved that over your arm, you understand that your skin is capable of feeling very, very delicate touch. So the Pacinian would be deep. This is sometimes also called a lamellated corpuscle. And we're going to see that lamella translates to layers. So this is a layered corpuscle. If we look at this structure, which you guys I'm sure recognize as a hair, we have several structures associated with it. First of all, we have a nerve that comes up, and when a nerve supplies impulses or connects a structure, we say innervation. So this hair follicle is innervated, and you'll notice that all the hair follicles we see have their own nerve complex. So this guy's got a nerve, this guy's got a nerve. We have one here that's been cut, it's got a side view. We have one here that's still in the follicle. So this structure that wraps around the hair shaft and the bulb is called the follicle. Over here we have this odd looking structure. Over here we have it cross-sectioned. So this is a gland and this is a gland. And these are all associated with this hair follicle. In addition, we have a muscle. So I'm going to color this muscle in red. I'm going to put red up here. So the name of this little tiny muscle is the erector pili. Erector pili, and that translates to straight hair. So what the erector pili does is it allows the hair, it stands the hair straight up. And in 4.01, we talked about the reason why we need goosebumps, why we get goosebumps when our hair stands on end, either to try to help keep us warm in a futile attempt to keep us warm, because we don't have really thick hair like the critters, or in response to fear to make us look bigger and scarier. But that's the erector pili. I'm going to, let me see, let me grab a color here. All right, I'm going to use orange, and I'm going to use that to color in. We have two examples. One is a sectioned and one is not sectioned. Again, we're just noting these out today. We'll actually talk about them in more detail when we get to the respective sections, when we talk about the epidermis, when we talk about the dermis. So what I have here is a sebaceous gland. Sebaceous. And a sebaceous gland produces sebum, which is oil. And notice it's associated with a hair shaft or a hair follicle. Well, your hair needs oil. Your cutaneous membrane needs oil. You guys understand in the wintertime when, oh, things dry out, your skin starts to feel dry. Without that oil, it cracks, it can get sore, and it's a real problem. So our sebaceous glands provide that, and they send the oil out through the same pore that the hair follicle exits out of. All right, the next one we have, I'm going to try to do these in yellow, and these actually have different names. I have two different, that's not going to show up at all. Let me pick a dark blue. So we'll try dark blue here. And there's a duct that goes to the surface of the skin. So this is a gland and the duct. Now this duct empties into the hair shaft, to the follicle, and this empties onto the top of the skin. But these are sweat glands. And because they exit at different places, they actually have different names. But let's add sweat glands and ducts. So we're going to talk about back when we're going to loop back around to tissues. We're going to talk about the types of tissues that make up the glands and the ducts. Not necessarily the same. All right, finally, let's see, I'll do a dark green. So we have the hair. We have different parts to the hair. There's a cuticle, there's a bulb, there's a shaft. Again, we'll do anatomy of hair later, but I do want to point out, and I need another color. Let me grab a light pink, different color of pink. So what we see here that's not sectioned, oh, it's the same shade of pink. Rats. Try a different shade. Let me try that yellow now. Okay. Well, that's not going to show up very much, but you can kind of see a little bit. So without it being sectioned, that is the membrane that wraps around a hair that the hair grows from and connects the hair to the membrane, and this is called the follicle. While the hair is made of keratin, and it is most of it is non-living, the follicle is absolutely a living structure. It's tissue that, and it hurts when you pull your hair out. You've got nerves here and you've got attachment. That's why it hurts to have your hair pulled out. Okay, but to review, we picked the layers: epidermis, dermis, hypodermis, the type of tissue in each, kind of some general information about them. The fact we call that, when we have no blood vessels, by the way, we call that avascular. Avascular means no blood vessels. The fact that the dermis is highly vascular. We have our sensory neurons, the lamellated corpuscle, the Meissner's corpuscle, and then our accessory structures over here. So if you had this diagram on a test, you should be able to label anything on this diagram. I could give you this diagram and point to anything. You should be able to come up with a name for that. Also, you should be able to answer any multiple choice questions about the functions of these, understanding that we're going to do quite a bit more detail in the lessons to come. So that is an overview. Thanks for watching and have a good day.